Well, good morning, everyone. It is bright and early. This is the earliest meeting I think we have ever done here. And that is because, as you just heard, Sean is over in Southern California. So we needed to sort of sync up these different time zones. Look, as you all know, BrainChip has really been one of those companies that has captured the market's attention. And I suppose when your shares go from 5 cents to 90 cents in a couple of years, it's going to do that. It's interesting to note, though, here at Strawman, we've had members backing it as early as 2019, and it has proven to be very popular. It's actually the third ranked stock amongst all of the stocks that our members track on their portfolios, originally entering the index at about 46 cents. So needless to say, it is a business that I think many of our members are pretty familiar with. If you are new to the business, though, this is a company that develops neuromorphic artificial intelligence chips. And I'm not going to go anywhere near that in terms of trying to explain that. I'm going to throw that one over to Sean. What I can tell you, though, that what's interesting is that this is a company that's transitioning from an R&D phase to a commercial one. And they have now started shipping development kits. They've expanded the patent portfolio. And of course, there's this really interesting tailwind at their back with the explosive growth of AI in general. So with all of that out of the way, Sean, great to have you with us, and thanks for joining us.
Hey, Andrew, thanks so much for having me, and thank you for getting out of bed, everybody, good and early. So it's actually, we could have gone a little later. It's only 1:30 here in California, but thank you nonetheless.
No, I'm happy to do it. Happy to do it. A lot of interest on BrainChip, and also a lot of confusion. I'd probably be fair to say too, a lot of contention. It seems to be a business that really divides people. And so hopefully we can bring a bit of clarity to everything here today. And as I said before, Sean, I think it's always useful to start right at the top. Maybe you could give us a bit of a quick lesson in what neuromorphic edge AI chips are and do, and what the use case is.
Absolutely. What I'd probably like to do, maybe, because I've got about a half a dozen slides or so, I think maybe be a good context setter. Is that okay?
Absolutely. Yeah. Let me make you a co-host, and then that should give you screen share ability. There you go.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm not opposed to just dialogue, but because it is an interesting topic and somewhat complex, I think a couple slides help a lot for
Great.
And by the way, with the spirit of conversation, feel free to interrupt me as I'm going through this. And if not, we'll talk after I'm done. Okay?
Perfect.
And, I will go off camera just for a moment while I'm doing this, because sometimes the video feed on Zoom doesn't work out quite that well.
Yep, no problem.
Let me just go off and let me find the screen share.
While Sean's doing that, everyone, let me just remind you that we've got a Slido link if you'd like to ask some questions. I'm going to pop I'll pop that in the Zoom chat. Of course, if you're in the Zoom room with us as opposed to on our website, you can just go ahead and use the Zoom chat.
Hopefully I've got the right one going here. Okay, can you see my slides?
Perfect. Yep.
Okay, great. I'm going to leave them in this model just in case we click around a little bit, so it's a little informal. And of course, in the US, we always start these kind of presentations with forward-looking statements, which says, we'll be making some comments and statements. And if you'd like a copy of this, of course, you can talk to Tony, who's on here, and get you a copy. But I always think the best way to start this is to talk about the company. First of all, we're BrainChip, and we are the new standard for Edge AI. And I'm very excited to be here and explain what that new standard is and why it matters so much to customers and can matter so much to you as investors or potential investors. On the surface, what may appear complex is actually pretty simple. And I think once you hear about this, you'll start to think it makes really good common sense. You'll start to wonder, why wasn't it always done this way? Why do we make it so hard? And what may also appear to be a little bit academic and scientific, it's not. It's here and it's real. And so what I like to say at moments like this, instead of my words, we like to start with the words of another. And in this case, we'll start with one of the world's premium brands, Mercedes-Benz. And of course, Mercedes-Benz put this out at CES, which is a very large trade show here in the US, in January of this year. It was picked up by world-class publications such as Motor Trend, VentureBeat, and EE Times. And we couldn't have said it any better. You asked me a really good question to open the conversation, Andrew, and right there in the top right of that graphic says it all. Neuromorphic computing, a car that thinks like you. And I'll describe that in a lot more detail, but very Englishly, not technical language here as we go through this. Also call attention to a couple of keywords on this slide as well, which is at the bottom of that first paragraph that says it's 5 to 10 times more efficient than conventional voice control. And you'll see a theme as I go through the next half a dozen or more slides that talks about efficiency, effectiveness, and performance. And of course, the last bullet on the bottom talks about energy needs. And we'll talk a lot about the energy savings and why that matters to customers and quite frankly matters to the world. And usually people ask a lot of times when they think about AI in cars or power in cars, they think about the drivetrain. They say, well, how much does it matter? But if you're doing a car like this, which they try to challenge Tesla and get 1,000 kilometers out of the car, every bit of power matters and every bit of performance matters. Hence, that's why they sought out our technology to put in the EQXX. So a little bit about the history. You started right on this, Andrew. This is a company that really spent many, many years on research and development. Primarily, we started as a research group for many, many years. I'm going to say half a dozen years. In the last 3 years or so, developing a product. We've gone through a lot of stages, and I'll describe that a little bit more when I start to go through the product itself. But the most important takeaway is that we're in market right now with real products. And that's why I came. I'm a new CEO. I came here in December of last year with the distinct goal of accelerating our commercialization efforts. A little bit about me. I've been in the tech industry for decades, primarily in go-to-market organizations for some of the biggest companies in the world, like Hewlett-Packard and Compaq, and small, nimble startups, including some fast-moving companies out of Silicon Valley called Fusion.io, where I have very large go-to-market teams and small, nimble go-to-market teams. A lot of people ask me at this moment why I came here, quite frankly, and said, well, what did I see about this as a company? When I started to look at this company, there were some really interesting things that caught my attention. First, living in the heart of Silicon Valley, before I moved here for this opportunity, I lived in the heart of Silicon Valley for the last 8 or 9 years. Had access to some of the best minds in the world, engaged in some really powerful organizations. So I had the opportunity to vet the technology. And I came out with a conclusion, and even I'm more convinced today that technology is real, transformational, and quite frankly, nothing in the market is close. Secondly, I looked at the team, and I've worked with some great teams, but I've never seen a team this focused, this dedicated, this talented. I looked at the brands we're engaged with. You'll see some of them in coming slides. The quality of the engagements were world-class. And then lastly, I knew I could add some unique value, because having all this really cool and interesting and powerful technology doesn't mean anything unless you get it in the hands of customers around the world. And that's what we're going to do this year and next year and the year after. So a little bit, you guys talk about the opportunity in the introduction part. The simplest way to look at this from a market opportunity is, if you're familiar with the term Internet of Things or Edge AI or just edge computing, the proliferation of edge devices is growing very, very quickly and exponentially. You can see, so it's a very big market, fast growing market that serves very, very many verticals. So this is a very good illustration about the opportunity and the type of verticals, and I'll discuss verticals a little bit more. But the other big takeaway from this is 2 things. One is all of these devices are getting smarter or need to get smarter, because having these edge devices that don't have any intelligence is sub-optimizing the functionality. So there's a strong trend across all verticals to make edge devices more intelligent via artificial intelligence. And our kind of technology, you'll see, you can certainly make edge devices more intelligent with other ways, but ours is uniquely suited for this opportunity because of the way we went about it. And you'll hear a lot more as I go through this. The other thing is I would call about the implications. If you went about solving the AI opportunity with traditional kind of ways, with traditional competitors, it would quickly become unsustainable. You can't keep adding more compute capability, more data, more bandwidth, or you're simply going to run out of capacity in the world, and it's certainly not very efficient. In fact, some analysts that I talked to are quoting, after cryptocurrency, unless things change, artificial intelligence will either be second or surpass cryptocurrency in terms of power consumption around the world. So this calls for a radically different approach, and that's exactly what BrainChip does. So little bit, I'm just really going to focus more on the bottom right, since I kind of talked a little bit about the challenge in conventional, where the sensors on the graphic on the left going up to the cloud. But what we do very simply at a simple level is we don't address all the data. We do really smart selective sampling of data that allows us to do the computations much better, more efficiently. We do the computations on a chip. There's no back and forth into the cloud or into some server. We can do all this with a fraction less power. We can do it all on the chip and learn on the chip, which again is very unique in the industry, where anybody on the broadcast who's familiar with traditional AI techniques knows that a lot of training goes on in the clouds and reloading of data. We do it all locally. Very, very different. So you mentioned this very interesting term called neuromorphic, which would be kind of scary, but at its simplest level, it's really how the brain works. It's just how we all look at it. So the way the brain works is we process information with a very simple few events. And we can only look at things 1 or 2 times, and we typically learn. And usually what I say, the best example is a human face. I met you for the first time a few moments ago, Andrew. I'll not forget you, because what I do, I don't try to learn the face structure every single time, which would be overwhelming, which says, okay, what's a face look like? But I know most faces have 2 eyes, a nose, a set of ears, and a hair, and some kind of hairline. And so you really just pick up the subtle differences around that face. So now I know that's Andrew's face. And that's the way neuromorphic computing is. We need to look for the differences. We don't try to learn the facial structure every time, because otherwise we would get very confused and overloaded as human beings. Our brain is smart, our brain is efficient. So isn't our technology. So
just quickly, sorry to jump in, Sean.
Yeah, please.
Does that mean that each chip has to be sort of quite specific in its application? I mean, there's just so much data that's sort of in there that needs to sort of come in, be processed, learned. What's the capacity like, and how do you scale that up? So if you're doing stuff that requires quite a bit of computation, even though it's on chip, is that just achieved by sort of doing a bunch of chips in parallel, or is there just a sort of an upper limit as to what you can do on the chip itself before you need to take it back to a server somewhere?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Actually, there was about 3 or 4 questions there, and I'll try to address them now and also address them a little bit further in detail. I think the first comment / question was about use cases, or the ability to run use cases. One of the things that you'll see as I talk about competitors is we've got the ability to address a much wider variety of use cases than most competitors in the market. And if you look at more kind of edge chip companies out there, they're usually singular in their focus, singular in their senses. So in our case, we address all the 5 human senses, and I'll talk a little bit more about that actually on the next slide. So a lot more flexibility in the number of use cases with that. Secondly, about the workloads variety, when you have something like our product, to bring it to life, you really have those, without getting overly technical, is models, what we call models in artificial intelligence, and data sets. And you'll hear me talk about how those come onto our chip and work. So there's a real bunch of flexibility with this technology can be used for in terms of use cases, vertical, and workloads. Lastly, about your comment about how big of a workload, if you will. This is probably the first start, and the next slide will illustrate a little bit more. And if you can see the cursor, I don't know if you can see me moving it, certain workloads are very efficient in terms of their data sets and models, fit ideally, let's call it an embedded standalone chip model, okay? Others, which may be a little more complex, you get those that could go out, and in those cases, our chip can work in conjunction with a host. And so that's what makes us very unique. We can go standalone for certain workloads like I'm illustrating, or if we need to work in conjunction with a host, it allows us to address both of them. By the way, if you do it in a standalone model or with a host, you still get the same kind of benefits of efficiency, effectiveness, and power savings. So hopefully I answered your questions. Did I?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, great. Good question. Very good question. Actually, for somebody who didn't know, you gave me a really nice softball, though. Thank you for that.
I do what I can.
There you go. So let me carry on with that theme, because I think this illustrates some of the points. You can see what I'm saying right in here. The ability to address all of these senses, vision, auditory, smell, touch, etc., puts us very unique. But the other thing I touch in this little slide here is things around that I talked about standalone or in a host. But what I really try to call out is a CNN to SNN conversion thing. I think this is really, really important. Anybody out on the broadcast that is a machine learning person will be familiar with the term CNN. This is convolutional neural networks, which is kind of, let's call that the mainstream way of things done today. And what we do what we call a spiking neural network, which is really neuromorphic in how the brain works, and it's much more efficient. So some of the sensors that we have in here will create some SNN networks, and you get that incredible efficiency that I talked about in the front end. But if you've got an investment, if you're a customer, have an investment in convolutional neural networks, we have a framework or utility, whatever the word you want to call it, called MetaTF. You really run it through MetaTF and it converts them. It allows you to run on our chip and get the same kind of performance. So what does that really mean when you strip away the fancy technical words? It's really an investment protection thing for anybody who has invested in models. We can convert them from old traditional way and run it on our hardware. Very, very powerful and resonates really well with our customers. So a little bit about things makes a difference. I just kind of touched upon this. Most importantly to me is this MetaTF that I just talked about. The fact that we can address a spectrum of all the devices, all the senses on there, the fact that we can do it, that we do it on the chip, we consume very low power, and that we do event-based convolution, basically only picking up things that are different. We're not wasting cycles and energy on anything that's been there and static. This is what I call our beauty picture here, a little bit about our chip. And the simplest way to look at this, I would point out 2 or 3 simple points here. It's out there, it's real. We work with our partners around TSMC that make the chip for us. All the magic is on the bottom, which is neural fabric here. And I'll address your question about scale. Actually, I forgot to address one back in there, and some interfaces. So you were also asking about workloads that work with a host, or how much could you scale, I think, within the chip. And so each one of these we have in here are what they call neural processing units. So in here, or nodes. So this is an NPU, but in here you can scale and put all of these on this mesh network that I'm circling in here, and allows you to get all the power in a kind of a mesh network kind of fashion for scale. And I'll talk about our business model in a moment, besides chip, but I don't want to steal too much away from it. But if you're an IP customer, you can also configure and create chips with different number of nodes, which allows you to scale to different workloads as well. So it's a lot of scaling within the chip, a lot of scaling without, and then the outside of the chip, either with a host or even within the IP and setting up a multi-node kind of chip.
Sorry to jump in again, Sean. Does that mean that depending on the customer, the chip will be built, more or less to their specification? So a Mercedes might have different requirements than a NASA or someone like that. Is that a fair way of looking at it?
Yeah, well, kind of and kind of not. I would simply say we have a chip out in the market today that we sell, and that's a chip. We will be producing other chips and other configurations, in the near future. But for those that want to have, in some of the examples, what you're going to see is our business model. We really sell intellectual property or IP, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. In that case, those companies, the more sophisticated companies, will buy our IP and create their own system on a chip, and they can configure out the number of nodes that they need on that chip. So that's really the flexibility. The technology is incredibly flexible, and the way the model, it's actually a very good question/comment for an investor meeting, because if you look at the trends across all silicon, across all industries, not just us, the move towards custom silicon is very pronounced in the industry. One size fit all silicon is kind of gone. While we do make chips, and there are customers that will use that chip because it fits their use case just fine, the ability to buy IP from us, which is very different than anybody else in the market, in AI, on edge AI, is really what's going to distinguish us as part of the investment, because those will allow the flexibility to go into all these use cases for very specific things for some of the companies like you just mentioned. Okay,
great, thank you.
just a little bit about positioning where we are against some competitors. I've got 2 slides and I've got maybe 3 more before we're all done, and then I'll turn my camera back on and we'll continue with the dialogue. So just to position a little bit more, if you're familiar with the classic data center model and some of the traditional kind of companies here on the left, and then what you might see is companies that use that same classic approach, but kind of trying to move it towards the edge, but it has a lot of the same kind of properties, and meaning heavy power, heavy compute, a lot of heat, not very efficient, trying to bring that to the edge. And then, excuse me, only a few of us down here on the edge and that are truly neuromorphic, ourselves and some of these companies in here. So let me contrast to our what we consider the real true competition, the neuromorphics. The others, I think we've proven that taking an old approach to a new model doesn't make sense on the left and the middle. But when you really look at the other neuromorphic players here, which are the top 3, ourselves and the other 2 lines below it, you can see we have some very distinct differences against the other neuromorphic companies. And I'm going to just point out, of course, we're the only ones with all the check boxes, but I would point out these other 2. You can't do on-chip convolution. You cannot do standalone. We can. Now, they have certainly the benefits that we do around power that's inherent in neuromorphic. There's another really important difference that I talked about earlier with MetaTF. Most of the industry models are written on something called TensorFlow. And we have with our MetaTF the ability just to take those models, run MetaTF on it, and put it right on our chip. The others, you have to learn a whole new framework. You don't have the investment protection. It's all manual if you're going to convert old models. So against the competition, we stand, very differently. We have the great power. You can do it on the chip. We can do it standalone, and you can do the investment protection through MetaTF. And lastly, most importantly, we're the only one actually on the market today. The others are research chips, but if you want to buy a neuromorphic production chip, it's us, no one else. All right, a little bit about our revenue model, then I'll stop and wrap up here. So at the simplest level, the company is being built on a couple of very simple revenue models. We make chips for volume sales. That's one. We do sell boards and systems, but that's more for evaluation development. So if you look on our website, you could see such things as mini PCIe boards for a couple $100. We have systems, but those are all evaluation and development things. The company's revenue streams are going to be in our volume chip sales and IP licensing. And of course, when you do IP licensing, it's similar to a company called ARM, which many of you are familiar with, where you're going to have initial licenses, and I'll give you some examples in a moment, followed by royalties. So when somebody buys a license, they create a product, back to the comment or the discussion you and I just had, Andrew, they're creating their custom chips, and as those chips get deployed, we collect royalties. And if you look at the models of company like ARM and other, the gross margin profiles, once they're up and running, are very, very attractive. So that's our business model: chips and IP licensing, and of course royalties that come with it. So a little bit about this, and I mentioned some of the brands earlier. We've got many companies in our early adopters. We can't talk about most of them for one simple reason. They want this to be kept very confidential because they view it as a very competitive weapon in the markets they serve. So, but we have a very active early adopter program, people evaluating our technology. And then we've actually got some good licensees on that we actually have. So Renesas is a very leading leading producer of microcontrollers. They bought a license, they're creating their products. As they release those microcontrollers, we will be collecting royalties. Mega Chips is another one. It's very interesting. This is a company that builds chips on the behalf of other companies. So if you go to Mega Chips, you can look website, you can see the markets they serve and the customer that they serve. They will be building chips on the behalf of those customers. And of course, royalties will flow as those chips come out for us as well. These are 2 deals we've announced. And of course, we're working on others. So, and then before I come back on camera, the simplest way to look at the investment opportunity, the market is big. It's growing quickly. The dynamics of the market about edge AI devices getting smarter and need to get smarter are moving very much in favor of our kind of AI, not the old-fashioned way of AI. Our technology is unique, it's flexible, it's power sensitive. MetaTF allows you to have investment protection for your older models, existing models. We've got marquee brands, we've got licensees. And most importantly, we're in the market right now. And that's the way to look at us as a company. Let's have some dialogue now.
Thank you, Sean. That was really valuable. It's kind of blows me away a little bit that you kind of in the ring with the likes of IBM and Nvidia and stuff, and still first to market. It's very impressive, particularly for a company that I think only had about 27 employees up until 2020. My first question was going to be exactly on competition, but you've answered that. What I'm going to do instead, though, is actually we've had a few come through from our members. One of them goes by the pseudonym of Slymeat, who's probably your biggest supporter amongst our members. And so I'm going to throw a few from him if I can.
Sure.
He's interested to know what actual products out there are containing Akita at the moment. Is there an easy way to find that out?
No.
Yeah.
No, the reason being, of course, we most of our customers want to keep it very confidential for the reason I said. If you're in a competitive situation, they look at this as their kryptonite, and we're under very tight confidentiality laws. Of course, we comply with the ASX rules that require us to announce certain things, but where we can keep quiet and be within the guidelines and the rules, we are. So there's no easy way to know exactly the answer to that question for somebody. Of course, I know, but most people couldn't.
Understand. I guess in terms of having an IP licensing model, it does allow a rapid scaling because you guys don't need to bulk up in terms of the manufacturing and all of this kind of stuff. So now we're sort of at this commercialization phase. What is the opportunity like there? I mean, you're coming off a very small base, and I know these are the difficult questions to ask because it's how long is a piece of string. But when you're sort of looking out to the horizon over the next 5 or so years here, what's the kind of quantum that we're talking about in terms of that revenue opportunity?
Yeah, so I'll talk more about a model than the actual opportunity, but I do want to make sure that introduce Tony as well. So Tony, of course, is our IR person. And Tony, feel free to opine if I answer something you want to add something to it. So what we're seeing right now is a very big appetite, not only for the companies that I showed, which is the kind of the companies that make chips, but also companies, brands that are going to be the consumer of those chips, right? So, we talked about Mercedes as a good example. Obviously, they don't make chips, they make cars. But certain companies want to control the design proprietary wise. So they're like, I want to own certain intellectual property, whether it's ours and others. And then they can go to a chip company and let's have them build on the behalf of them. And so what we're finding, to your question about the market opportunity, is rather interesting. So I would simply say, without the name, we're heavily engaged right now with an engagement model with a communications company. And I wouldn't have thought it was necessarily a use case, but what they're interested in is, of course, some artificial intelligence company. But they don't build chips, but they're going to perhaps buy our IP if they decide to do. And of course, then they'll work on behalf. So you can look at it this way: any industry that wants to have artificial intelligence on an edge kind of application is really fair game. And they're either going to buy a standard chip from us, or they can go from a company and have one built on behalf of, or they can own the IP and design themselves. So we're refining our engagement model because we're getting inquiries from all three of those constituents at the same time. Tony, anything you want to add to that, Tony? Do you agree with that? Or
I certainly do, Sean. I think it's worth trying to put some numbers around what we're talking about here. The total addressable market for edge AI devices is forecast to be $60 billion within the next 3 years. So in terms of market share, you don't need to get a big chunk of that total addressable market to start to see real revenue in the order of billions of dollars. Now, we will obviously seek to grab as much market share as we can while we have an advantage in the market and while we are the first and only current producer of neuromorphic AI chips. We're going to go as hard as we can, as fast as we can, to get as much of that market as we can. But that market is growing at 12 to 15% per annum compound average growth rate. So that 60 billion is going to be 100 billion within the next 5 years. So we are really positioned at the beginning of that huge growth. And you only have to see the explosion in the growth of edge AI devices, the Internet of Things. There are currently 40 billion edge IoT devices in the world, and that number is growing at 20% compound average growth rate per annum. So, the market is expanding rapidly, and we are the only players in this part of the market with a product ready to go. And that is a distinct and unique feature of BrainChip, and it's one of the reasons why we've attracted a lot of attention, and it's one of the reasons why a lot of both tech companies and investors are beating a path to our door right now. They're curious, they want to know what this neuromorphic technology is, and in a lot of cases they see this as a real insight into the future of computational edge AI, and are looking at ways that they can incorporate this technology into their products for the future.
Thanks, Tony. I guess one question that sort of follows from sort of the revenue one is the margin one, or at least at a gross sort of margin level. I presume there's a bit of a difference between the actual chip manufacturer and IP licensing. But can you give us a sense of what margins kind of look like potentially at scale?
Yeah, again, I'll talk more models, and I can just, if you just look at ARM, right? ARM's gross margin as a mature company is in the 90s, right? And obviously that we're a long way from that kind of revenue scale, but that's exactly why. So we certainly see, we're early and we're still consuming cash as we're building things out. So obviously our margin profile is not anywhere like that right now. But we're consuming cash because the market opportunity is here right now. So that's what we're building out sales and marketing. And of course, we're keeping accelerating our technology development. Actually, you made a comment earlier when we only had about 27, you're right. I would simply say we're going to exit this year close to 100 people to give you a sense of our growth this year. So we're adding a lot more people to the opportunity as it goes through. But yeah, the gross margins, once you're up and running, are very, very attractive. The other thing I think that's rather interesting about this model is once you get to a kind of a certain scale, the additional labor component, if you will, is pretty minimal. And that's how you get these kind of margins, right? The technology is there, the IP packages are there. And now you're really in a sales and marketing motion with not a lot of additive kind of cogs, if you will.
Okay, interesting. This is probably more of a comment than a question, but there's a couple of other interesting companies on the ASX. One is Weebit Nano, which does ReRAM technology. The other one's Strategic Elements that does self-charging printable batteries. Is there any opportunity that's sort of available there in terms of bulking out the offering?
I have not looked at those, but I would simply say those who know me, now that I know, I will look at those, because I don't think any opportunity should be left unturned. So I think our technology can be applied in any place that needs intelligence in their device, or more intelligence at the most efficient way to do it. So absolutely, look into it.
Gotcha. A couple ones I had as well is the go-to-market strategy here is how do you spread the word? How do you get in front of potential customers? What does those sales cycles tend to look like? Are they long? Are they short? Or does it depends on the client? Can you give us a bit of flavor around all of that?
Yeah, absolutely. How do you spread the word? So first of all, again, I came here with the explicit goal of commercialization, go to market. And I think, to me, one of the things I was amazed at, although it may seem well known to people on this broadcast, we have the best kept secret in the world, I believe, and that we had not done necessarily the most effective job of getting the word out. One of the first things I did was hire a world-class CMO. He's been here about 6 weeks right now. And you can look for some things that are going to happen in the next quarter, and certainly in the second half, about the way we get the word out in a very different way that is very, 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 very loud and makes some impact. So that's one. Two, we're also going to be a lot more strategic in how we do that, because this is the ultimate business to business sale. You know, you're not selling this to consumers. So proper channels, proper messaging, our CMO and his team are working on that right now. Actually, clear identification about sales models. You asked a great question about sales model. It is a long sales cycle, let's be clear. What I look for in customers when I go through our pipeline is customers that are going to typically release a product, meaning they're going to do whatever their markets are with their core, let's just say it's a consumer electronic. If they're going to do that, they have a design cycle of X months. We need to sync up our sales cycle on those design. But it's not like you buy something and it shows up the next day, because, you know, designing world-class products takes some time. So we try to line up our sales cycle right on those design and production ones. Because if you're not careful, what you can do is go into conversations without an end, meaning it's such interesting technology, you can go and say, well, interesting, and then you're kind of more of an experiment. We're highly focused on the ones that customers that are producing products will sync up and run them through, because that now allows you to have the commercial conversations that much quicker. But you know, they are business to business conversations, so they take some time.
One of the things that's been in the news a bit lately is supply chain disruptions, particularly with chips as well. A lot of car manufacturers having to sort of go back to sort of analog sort of technology in a lot of ways. Is that impacting you guys at all?
No, not directly. Now, we plan well in advance for our own chip supply, right? And we're watching it very, very carefully. And the conversations we're having with prospects go like this along the following. We have X amount here that we can. If you're thinking you're going to do this, we need as much notice. So we're working very closely with that and watching it, but we've had no impact on our revenue or anything at this point. But we're engaging early and disclosing to our customers the supply chain kind of side of the house. Now, the IP customers, of course, they could, if they don't get it lined up in the supply chain issue right now, because the delays are without elaborating, or twice what they were almost a year ago at this point.
A couple more here from some members here. NDAs are constraining what you can say, but when do you guys get to a point when you can start disclosing some of this sort of customer agreements, or is it more something that we should be watching the financials for to get a sense of that traction?
I would watch the financials. That's the way to look at it, because I don't see the day really where customers really want to talk. Now, we ask our customers, of course, because it's in our best interest to say, can we talk about it? But most are just really resonant because they look at it as a competitive advantage for them. So the best way to watch this is watch the financials.
Okay. We actually had a member, Slimemeat, again, purchase one of your chips recently. He makes note that it had serial number 195 on it. Does that mean that at least 195 units of the Akita PCIe board have been sold?
That's I don't know, but I don't know about the 195.
Well, can you tell us? Can you give us a sense of how many of you've
the board, the actual boards?
Yeah,
the actual physical. Yeah, it's measured. It's probably it's again, it's not a business. Let me be clear. It's not a business that we're trying to be in for revenue, but it is measured in that low hundreds like that. That's the way to look at it.
Yeah. So these are these development kits that we want to get into the hands of people, get them familiar with it, and then. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah,
that's
gotcha.
Right.
Gotcha.
I call them a kind of a sale. It's like it's really a sales and marketing thing. Get it out, try, and we're actually going to put some innovative programs out in the second half of the year to get them out in a little more targeted fashion. And thank you, Slimy, for buying a board.
Yes. What have we got here? Can you tell us roughly what percentage of EAP customers continue to engage?
Sure. I think virtually all, I'm aware of maybe one, but I think virtually all EAPs are all still active in our program.
What do you think about Elon Musk talking about implantable brain chips? Is that a bit of a muddying of the name there, or what do you like?
Yeah, well, that is certainly not what we do. In fact, I forget what his company is, that I always have to explain to people, oh, you're like whatever his company is. I said, no, we're not like that. I really would not be appropriate for me to comment on a guy who's so successful.
Do you see True North as competition? IBM haven't published anything on their website about that since 2018. Is it even on the radar for you guys?
It's definitely on the radar. As you would imagine, part of my job is to pay attention to all the competition, and I never take any of it light. I think I'm a very competitive person generally, but I'm just saying we're comfortable where we are with them, against them. But yeah, I don't dismiss, and I certainly don't disparage competitors. So,
I guess a couple of questions I always end with here is one is, what is it you think when you're speaking to investors that is the most misunderstood thing about the company? If you could sort of shake the market by the collar and sort of, make them understand one thing, what would it be?
I think it's what I like to say is how we solve problems uniquely. Artificial intelligence is not unique. It's obviously here and it's out, but how we do it is unique. And I think that's the point that can get lost a lot. And how you solve these problems and applications are really, really important, because if you do it the way we do it, it results in all those things I talked about, which is efficiency, performance, and quite frankly, it's the future. So I think many people misunderstand. It's like, oh, it's another implementation of AI. It's groundbreaking, it's transformational. And I believe without a doubt that our technology, like all technology, de facto standards can arise. Without a doubt, I think we have this conversation 8 years from now, 7 years from now, we'll look and say, why did we ever look at edge AI with that old paradigm, with those old competitors, those old tools? So yeah, if I had to grab everybody by the virtual collar, think of us as different, unique, and the right way to do it.
Okay, gotcha. Actually, I do have another one I thought of here as well. And again, these are investor kind of questions. We are investors, but
sure,
you've gone from this long period of research and development, and now we're in this sort of commercial phase. So the financials are all going to be very quickly evolving. There's $19 million on the balance sheet, so you're pretty well covered at the moment. But how does the cost base shift as you pivot more to that commercial side of things? And how much of a runway do you think you've got until we sort of tip past maybe an inflection point of cash flow break even?
Well, we don't talk about, I would simply say I have committed to the board. I have a model, and we have a board. And so we have a line of sight to when that break even goes. I'm just not at liberty to share it right now. That's one. We have obviously a lot of runway on our cash position. I'm not worried about that whatsoever in market, but yes, we have line of sight. And remember I talked about building up to 100 people or so this year. We think at that point, we're actually at a pretty good size scale. And we're going to say after that, the revenue growth will start to outgrow the expense growth pretty rapidly. That's the model that we're going to start to see leverage.
I should have asked this before. The headcount is increase largely a function of sort of a sales and marketing contingent, or elsewhere.
Two things. One is it's just really two things: sales, marketing, and engineering. Right? When you think about it, the heart and the soul, the muscle, everything in this company is technology. I can't not continue and invest in that. We have a lot to say in future meetings about where we're going with our technology. It's as exciting as it is right now. It's very exciting in the near future as well. So yeah, sales, marketing, engineering, no overhead whatsoever. So
gotcha. And this will be the last one, I promise.
Oh yeah, ask away.
What it's always an interesting one, because there's a lot of challenges with any business. But what, Sean, is the things that keep you awake at night? What are the big challenges that you sort of see in the next couple of years?
What I see is an opportunity. What keeps me up at night is just what I said in the front end. The opportunity is here right now. It's just right here. Can we get the word out quick enough? Can we get the engagements out real quick? Because the market's warming, the demand is there. We just got to get the word out. So that's what keeps me up. Do we have the right marketing messages, the right channels? Do we have the right sales model? I have no sleep loss whatsoever on our products, because it's world class, and I have the complete faith of the team. But we've got to get the sales model down really well, and we're getting there, and we're really solid on it. Stay tuned. There'll be more things to talk about that. But yeah, that's what keeps me up at night. Get the word out.
Great. Well, I don't think I've got any other questions, and there's none that I can see that have come through. So we might pop a pin in it at this point. But Yeah, Sean and Tony, it's been really wonderful having you come speak to us. It's been very illuminating and answered a lot of questions. So thank you very much. And we'll definitely be keeping a close eye on things.
Thank you so much, Andrew. It was a lot of fun. It was a great way for me to, thank you for getting out of bed for everybody as well.
Yeah. Well, it's good to try and get out of bed before 7 every now and then. So I should probably do it more often. But yeah, thanks very much, guys.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.